Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the 1.73 Mission Over Measure podcast. This episode is brought to you by Get TPA Fit. Please visit gettpafit.com to learn how you can go from stuck to unstoppable in the pursuit of your mission. So today we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to be interviewing my dad instead of us interviewing another guest. And the context or the questions I'll be asking him is based around the differences between stewardship and ownership in running your business. This has been a idea that I've been thinking about recently, the differences between the two and how that can steer the decisions you make in running your business if you own your own business and stuff like that. So I want to open it up, Dad, with just what do you believe stewardship is and what do you believe ownership is? And is there a difference?
You couldn't start with is it sunny out? What's the temperature?
Absolutely not.
Who's coming for dinner tonight? Okay, just go right into the tough ones.
Yep.
I'm going to start with ownership. Think of like private property. So when you own something, there's a declaration, there's some perhaps official recording of possession. So in the context of the business, right, we launched this particular business in January 5th, 2015. We had to sign some legal documents, and it was stated that this business is ours, at this particular location, doing this particular type of work. We register it with the state of Michigan. We have a federal tax ID number, which the IRS happily tracks us. And I think fundamentally, like the ownership's a very technical concept to some degree, not 100%. Because if I go back to the concept, almost the philosophy of ownership, or think of like private property, this is where somebody can go from like the kind of the transactional technical part of ownership, how I would understand it. Stewardship, let's go there, because there's this middle ground where I think they actually marry. So stewardship, Henry, I've always looked at as like it's caretaking. So you ask me to be a caretaker. So for example, as a parent of you and Georgia, like I have a role to play as a steward, right? To not an overseer, but a caretaker. Someone, a shepherd might be another way. A shepherd cares for his or her sheep. You're given the responsibility, the accountability to care for the well-being of another. That's, for me, a really important concept, and I appreciate this conversation. So, what's the middle ground? I think in the philosophical sense, ownership in terms of like private property, here's the connection. When you're asked to own something, I believe true ownership becomes stewardship eventually. So I can own, how do I say this? We play hockey on Saturday mornings. I own a pair of shin guards. We play pretty hard. If they crack, they break. If I lose it, big deal. I'll just go get another one. I own the shin guards. I'm not a steward of the shin guards. I know it sounds it's a weird example to use, but I don't really care. I might own something, but if I don't care, there's no way I can steward that which I own. So I think for me, there is a distinction. Now, when it comes to the business and perhaps like where I've gone or where I've gotten to is that it's actually more enjoyable to consider being a steward of this business than an owner of the business. Technically, legally, I appreciate the ownership, but what gets me up in the morning is not that, hey, I'm a business owner. What gets me up in the morning is I have this responsibility. I have this accountability. I have this job to do of being a steward of the business. But of the business isn't just the entity, it's all the people we serve. It's you and the rest of our TPA team, amazing people. Like that's my number one job, is to actually be a steward of those we serve inside the organization as well as outside. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but for me, that's off the cuff, the distinction between ownership and stewardship, and the idea that there's a connection. There's some glue that holds them together.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And I want to go back to 11 years now when you started the business and you spoke about how now you feel like it's more rewarding to be a steward. But when you started it 11 years ago, did you feel that same way, or were you aware that you could be more than an owner if you didn't already feel like this was a steward led mission?
So 11 years ago, they say when you get on the plane, you're going someplace, and the flight crew gives you instructions around safety. And one of those instructions is, if we lose pressure in the cabin, masks will drop down. You're to put your on mask first and then help others. That's the simplest way that I interpret it. Well, why do we want you to put your mask on first? So that you have the resources, the oxygen, if you will, to be able to act and help others. Well, 11 years ago, and I use that, I guess, metaphor. I can never know. That's another question you can ask. Like, what's the difference between a simile, metaphor, and analogy? I have no idea. I think it's a metaphor. The metaphor is 11 years ago, I was just trying to get oxygen. We were starting this thing up. Like, you guys are much younger. There was tuition to pay. There was food on the table. There was a roof over our head. So the concept of stewardship likely wasn't ingrained. I mean, there was something that drew me to this kind of business, right? The coaching business, the training business, the facilitation, teaching business, like helping others. So there's certainly some aspect of stewardship there. But 11 years ago, it was like, how do we make this thing work? So it was more about the freedom that came along with being my own boss that I would put in the ownership category. Whereas now there's the benefit of that. I am the world's worst employee. I've started off, I learned how to be the world's worst employee by being one of the world's worst students. But the freedom of owning your own business is bar none for me. What makes it really meaningful is that we get the responsibility. We are offered the gift of responsibility of the caretaking of others.
Are there moments that you can look back on specifically, or just periods of time where you felt a shift between, okay, this is something more than just a way to make money or to get oxygen in your system?
Yeah, I think I don't know if there was, I'm not going to remember like the exact moment, but there was probably a threshold of, it was probably a combination of earnings, but like earnings are temporary, right? Because like all of this could go away tomorrow. I think the line in the sand was, we had enough inertia going in the right direction where building our pipeline and keeping a full client list seemed to take care of itself. And there's an enormous amount of pressure that gets taken off when that occurs. So you're not scrambling for the next opportunity, the next project, the next client. You're able to, once that kind of pipeline is secure, and we talk about this in the work we do with our clients, like the dependency, the risk of dependency on the owner, of the founder. There's those three core categories I always imagine. There's rainmaking, filling the pipeline. There's decision making, and then making all of the decisions initially, but then realizing that becomes overwhelming. You need to delegate a lot of that, and then just operating the business. So you think rainmaking, decision making, and operating, and those are three areas that we consistently see owners get overwhelmed when they're in that dependency mode or even that dependency mindset. I think when we crossed, it was for me, so it was the pipeline or the rainmaking, like, okay, that's actually taking care of itself, which then allowed me to move into, I don't have to make as many decisions because we can start building a team. And inside of building the team, we could hand off some of the decision making and hand off some of the operating. I share, perhaps it's a longer story than you're looking for. Having all three of those domains handled, that was probably the time. And if I actually market in a year, so 2015, coming out of COVID, probably about a year after COVID. And for us, it was a tragic event on a multitude of levels. Such a great example of some of the most horrible decision making ever. But that was actually something that helped us because it broke down a bunch of barriers. It forced us to reinvent. And it really confronted that concept of what do we actually have here? Like, what do we own? Taking that stewardship stance versus being terrified of what was going to happen in our business in 2020 through 2022. I think a lot of people actually realize like these folks really mean like they want to help and they actually want to help us out of a difficult time. That's the stewardship part of things.
Do you think, kind of on that topic, do you think that, or let me rephrase my question, is ego more tied to ownership or stewardship? Because like you were sharing about how some owners, they can struggle with delegating and giving up a lot of those decision making capabilities. Is part of that the ego of giving it up and realizing that the business that you own, that you're running, in order for it to grow and be more successful, has to become something bigger than you? Is that something that you see with different owners, where perhaps their ego is getting in the way of them letting go of of themselves, basically, in order to grow the business?
We'll keep the technical definition of ownership to the side because there's a very pragmatic, very important definition there. But in my mind, so I go back to your question, there's 100% ego. If I'm operating from ego, I'm operating from the context of ownership. If I'm operating from doing the work that I know God's asked me to do, then it's stewardship. And the other thing too is that, I don't know, is ownership easy? Probably. I mean, it's easy for me. It's easier than stewardship. Stewardship carries a weight. It carries a burden. Ownership, you get into trouble and you're the owner. You have the responsibility. It's not trouble that anybody wants. I would never wish that on anyone. So there's certainly a responsibility that comes in that context. But I think from like day to day moving forward on an upward trajectory, I've got to put my ego aside because sometimes being a steward means I have to, or we have to sacrifice something. An example, we realize we're not a good fit for a client. Ownership would say, well, we like the earnings, we'll just power through. Stewardship might actually have an open, honest, transparent conversation with that client to say, hey, Henry, I don't think we're the best ones to serve you. I've got someone I believe is better who would do the job that you're looking to have done. And we need to be willing to shake hands and part friends. We're giving up a relationship. We're giving up short term, we're giving up revenue or earnings. Long term, we're giving up referrals. So we're back to that, rainmaking, decision-making, operating, like we take a hit on the rainmaking side of things. But those are the decisions that stewards, I believe, when you're called to steward something, you've got to be willing to make those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, and this is perfect because I had written down a question I wanted to ask you, and I was hoping that there would be a point in time where I could fit it into our conversation. This feels like a good time. I wrote down, do you think suffering and responsibility are necessary parts of meaningful leadership?
Absolutely.
Maybe the word suffering may be a little heavy for the context, but I like you said sacrifice. So maybe do you think sacrifice and responsibility are necessary core, have to happen parts of meaningful leadership?
I wouldn't take suffering out. I'd put suffering, I'd have suffering be fit more with responsibility than sacrifice. Sacrifice, giving something up. There's plenty of things I've given up in life where there's zero suffering. So is there sacrifice in being a steward? Yes. Again, go back to that idea of like, I realize we're not the best ones to serve a client. We need to part ways. We're sacrificing a number of things when we follow through on terminating that relationship, if you will. But it's this suffering is a critical part of responsibility. Here's why I connect those two. So I believe there is a gift in responsibility. I'm going to go to the physical world. Well, put it in the context of the work that we do. Job as a business, Henry, is to help entrepreneurs achieve their ideal level of fitness. Well, how do you become more fit? You have to put effort in. You actually have to take responsibility for going to the gym. We literally put it in physical fitness terms. Going to the doctor, eating the right food, staying away from the things that are not good for you. That's a bunch of responsibility. I promise you, I would much rather have George's chocolate chip cookie pie than an apple any day. But if I eat, but if I eat that every day, I'm going to feel like crap. Like it's not going to work. Like I'm not going to be as fit as I could be. In fact, I'll probably end up sick. So is there suffering in taking on the responsibility of fitness? Absolutely. But that suffering makes us stronger. In other words, how do you build up muscle? I'm going to play an armchair, is it physiologist? Anyway, whatever. Biologist, human anatomy expert. My understanding is you lift heavy weight, you force a heavy mass against gravity, which tears down muscle fibers. And then when you rest, those muscle fibers repair back stronger. That's how you become stronger. Well, if you want to get stronger, suffering is a key ingredient. If you want to learn how to grow your business, suffering is a key ingredient. I think it's not that suffering is a consequence of sacrifice. I think that suffering is an ingredient of responsibility.
How much do you think viewing yourself or wanting to be a steward of your business versus an owner, and not the technical definition, but just simply it being all you, how much of being a steward keeps you going through that suffering to grow? Do you think that if you're just simply an owner, it's all you, it's coasting, and there's hard times that come upon you and it's just you, do you think that it's easier one way or the other to be a steward versus an owner?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I can only put it in the context of where we find ourselves. And today, in particular, we've taken on what we call an impossible goal for the next 3 years. It's a larger goal for the business than we've ever promised before. In fact, it seems ludicrous, seems insane that we promised something like this. The reason we did, though, was because of the concept of stewardship. So if we grow in the way we've outlined, the way we envision, the way we promised, we will benefit tremendously. More importantly, hundreds of other people will benefit, and not just the clients that we help out directly. Imagine, when we're focusing in on the trades, on construction, and helping owners of those types of businesses create sellable, scalable, eventually sellable businesses. If they're successful and their trajectory is up versus down, how many more jobs will they create? How much will they be able to share in terms of the benefits, the profits of the business with their team? The people that they serve, if they're home builders, right? Or if they're industrial contractors, how they can improve infrastructure of a client business. Like literally the whole concept, like, it's a trite way to look at it, but like the tipping the dominoes, right? There's a whole chain of them that comes into play. And it starts with us making this promise for something far greater than we've ever done before, which, by the way, requires an enormous amount of responsibility, which requires a necessary ingredient of suffering. Yeah, the sacrifice is more, I'll say it this way, go back to that topic for a moment. Sacrificing now is a lot easier because we distinguish between what the noise is, the unimportant or the distraction, versus the signal that we need to focus in on. It's easy to sacrifice the noise. It does become more difficult to sacrifice some of the things that we're unclear about. But I tie that back in. Desire to be stewards is what drives our in our vision of growth today. 11 years ago, what drove my vision of growth was survival. That's for me a little bit more closely tied to this concept of ownership. And by the way, I share these distinctions for more than anything, just to create a distinction. I'm not saying ownership or the concept is bad or wrong in any way, shape, or form. Go back to like I personally love that we own this business. Nobody else does. I love that. There's an enormous freedom. But part of why I love it is the responsibility that comes with it. That's where the stewardship starts to take over.
Yeah, it's almost as if you need the purpose behind the growth. Would you say if there's no purpose behind growth, is that, are you capable of growing your business?
Well, you are, because I think it's just the distinction of you'd have to ask the question, you'd want to ask the question, what purpose am I working to fulfill? If it's filling up the bank account, you can own something. And by the way, I am a card carrying capitalist. I love the free market. I can't stand paying taxes every year. And at the same time, you look at it like that's a little bit of a gift because it means we're actually earning money, beyond what our expenses are. Ownership, defining a purpose for ownership and defining a purpose for stewardship are critically important. And for those listening, I want to be responsible to not insinuate that ownership is bad and stewardship is good. It's literally, I think, Henry, you just asking that question, like, what's the purpose behind why you own this, why you're engaged with this? That's a critical question. You go back to, Simon Sinek has made a name for himself around that concept of why. It's so important to discern that, because the owners I meet who are more interested in making a contribution are phenomenal owners. There's owners I meet that are less interested in making a contribution to a larger community. They're more interested in a contribution to themselves. Like, that's fine. I go back to, like, it's a free market economy we live here, and we're in the United States. My approach is I get more juice, so to speak, out of approaching what we do and what we have as from a stewardship perspective than owning it. Ownership is possession. Stewardship is contribution. Maybe that's another way to say it.
Yeah, I like that. I'd written a thought down before we started recording this, and I wrote down the difference between stewardship and ownership is mission, and deeper than that, a mission to serve more than just yourself. And going through this conversation, I think that thought's changed a little bit, because like you said, like, ownership isn't inherently bad, stewardship isn't inherently good. They're two different pathways, but the like you said, to how you get the juice, you get that deeper sense of purpose and drive when you view yourself as a steward versus an owner. And that could be different for anybody. People could, like you said, just love the idea of, they're just, the rainmaking part of it is just, that's what they love doing. That's what they love doing. And other people, they just love being a steward and growing it for something, whether it's a family business like us and we're growing it for, for the family, or growing it to serve our clients. It's finding that purpose. Maybe that's what it is. It's finding the purpose that gets you to drive to grow your business.
Yeah, and as you were talking through things, a thought came to mind that let's go back to, like, they're connected. Ownership and stewardship are connected. Can I be a steward if I don't own something? So, like, is there some element of possession I must have so as to steward? I don't know if I have an answer to that question, but I keep coming back to, if I don't care, meaning I just surrender any form of ownership, there's no way I can be a steward. So I'm clear that without ownership, I cannot be a steward. Can I be a steward without ownership? That's a little bit of an unanswered question for me in this moment.
Yeah. Maybe we'll leave that to the audience to answer
Right.
in the comments, answer in our emails. what that answer is. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Dad, thank you for doing this. This is a fun little interview from me to you.
Oh, yeah.
I hope
Thank
everyone
you.
enjoyed listening. Yeah, please leave your answers, leave your thoughts down below in the comments section. We'll definitely read and respond. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.
Hey there. If today's episode hit home, it's because you know this. Your mission is bigger than any metric, diagnosis, or expectation placed upon you. At Get TPA Fit, we help entrepreneurs and leadership teams delete chaos, earn more, and build value so they can go from stuck to unstoppable in the pursuit of their mission. Visit gettpafit.com to learn how you can break through those measures and pursue your mission.